Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
Look.
That's right, folks. It's Wednesday night. You know what that means. It's time to set your fantasy football lineups. And fear not, the Fantasy Greek himself is here. It's the Fantasy Greek starts and sits in 60 minutes for Week 10 of 2014 NFL season. Welcome to the program, folks. I'm Keith Grieve from 87sportsfans.com with the privilege of hosting Mr. Jim Saranteas from thefantasygreek.com. Jim, how are you on this fine Wednesday?
Keith, I am absolutely 100% fabulous and enjoying life. And, hey, it's Wednesday night. We're just a couple days away from fantasy football. Can you dig it? I can.
And if you have any lineup questions, the phone number to call in is 585-633-7487, 585-633-7487. We are going to go matchup by matchup and going to give you all of the free fantasy football advice that you can handle, who to start, who to avoid like the plague. It's getting into crunch time here. Week 10, you got this plus and 3 more regular season weeks in your fantasy football season. So now it's crunch time. If you're listening, don't hold back. And even if you're listening to this show on demand, you can always tweet your fantasy football lineup questions at the Fantasy Greek. That's the Twitter handle. All right, without further ado, let's head to the Thursday night game. The Cleveland Browns travel to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Browns are one of those teams where not much was expected from them. You have to commend them for what they've done. They're 4-1 at home. They're winning the games they're supposed to win. They sit at 5-3 overall. Brian Hoyer has done as good a job as you can be expected. And let's not forget that next week, not this week, but next week, Josh Gordon's suspension ends. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the Cleveland offense going forward. They travel to Cincinnati, a team who started out as playing just lights-out football. Then they hit their bye week, and then they stumbled an awful lot to getting back off the schneid last week. The thing is that Cincinnati's defense is still legit, and playing at home, I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. It's a division game, and if you've listened to this program through the season, you know that I have a hard time picking against the home team in division games, and I'm not going to break that trend here. I'm picking the Bengals.
Keith, I like the Bengals at home. No lying about it. For a lot of reasons. I do feel that these are two teams that, at least on paper, they seem more evenly matched than I think they are in reality. In reality, the Bengals are sporting a much better team. You've already referenced their defense, and I, like you, feel that their defense is very legit. In terms of a fantasy perspective, you've got to like Jeremy Hill and what he's been able to do with Gio Bernard out these last 2 weeks. He's a must-start, and I would even say if Gio Bernard wasn't the running back for the Bengals, Jeremy Hill would be the number one guy. He's going up against a defense giving up the second most yards to the position in 140.2 yards per game, as well as 7 TDs on the season. He's a must-start. He's, if not a top 10 play, he's a top 15 play. I like A.J. Green and Mohamed Sanu. It's actually been a nice, pleasant surprise to see them both on the fantasy gridiron together. It used to be that there was no second fiddle to A.J. Green, but now apparently there is. Both these guys are must-starts this week against the defense giving up 251 yards per game, as well as 12 passing touchdowns per game. For the Browns, it gets a little bit more irksome. It's harder to find, players that you got to like in fantasy. And I'm going to mention one player, and I say it somewhat begrudgingly, and that's Terrence West. I know he had a bunch of carries last week, but there was at least 1-2 other times this season he looked like he was going to take away that starting role from Ben Tate, and it didn't happen. So now we're sort of forced in the position and believing that that's going to happen again. And if so, you play a player like him as your second running back, certainly a flex consideration in a very favorable matchup at roughly 140 yards per game, and 9 TDs allowed on the season by the Bengals, which I was sort of surprised. That's they're tied for third most in the NFL. In terms of the defenses, I like them both this week as mid options. I don't like Andy Dalton. This is a game where you could see him going 250, maybe 1 to 2 TDs, and that's it. It's definitely a big cap on it because the Browns' defense is maybe not as legit as the Bengals, but it's pretty darn good. No reason not to get back to the nasty, Keith. Cincinnati wins.
Don't ever do that again.
Well, couldn't break the tradition.
No. In fact, I say that jokingly because I really love the cheesiness because it's usually me the one that's being cheesy on the air. So keep the cheddar coming.
Well, I had a second option. It was going back to Natty. I'm going back to Natty.
It's like truly trying to pick which puddle of vomit to lick. Okay, Dallas travels to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, you know what? Dallas was, the surprise of the season. And then they entered last week where they don't have Tony Romo due to injury. Brandon Weeden is the starter. And as any Cleveland Browns fan will tell you, it's very hard to win a game with Brandon Weeden as your quarterback. But not for nothing, that Cardinals team is probably a team that's flying under the radar because they're winning, but they're not really destroying anybody. They're just winning football games, and you got to tip your cap. But more on them later. We're talking about Dallas here. DeMarco Murray with his first pedestrian game last week without Tony Romo under center, 19 rushes for 79 yards. The Jaguars, they played the Bengals. They played them tough. They played them in Cincinnati. They only lost by 10. I know the Jaguars are 1-8, but Gus Bradley has that team still playing tough. They're still fighting. It'll be a shame. I don't know if there's no rumors or anything, but I'm just going to throw this out here. It would be a shame if he ends up losing his job because I would really like to see him develop Blake Bortles personally. Here's the point here, kids. Even if Brandon Weeden starts, if Dallas is not good enough to beat Jacksonville, even with Brandon Weeden, then what are we really talking about here with the Cowboys? So I'm going to pick Dallas to figure it out this week.
And I like the Cowboys too, Keith, and I agree with your assessment of Brandon Weeden versus Tony Romo. Even though I think there's still talk that Romo could possibly play, in which case I think you got to consider him for the start, given the matchup. And from the looks of it, if he does play, he'll then get their bye week off to sort of get himself back together. For me, what makes this game pretty much a no-brainer that the Cowboys should win it is the Jaguars are still having problems scoring. They're 32nd in the league at 15.7 points per game, and then they're giving up the third most points per game on the defensive side, and that's just a bad formula for disaster. In terms of fantasy, Denard Robinson will be your best bet on the Jaguars. He's a high RB2. I mean, it looks like he's the right guy for the job. It took him long enough to get to it, but 20 to 25 touches, and he's getting 100 or more yards in as well as a score. For the Cowboys, you keep DeMarco Murray going. He's a top 5 start this week against this defense. I love Des Bryant as a wide receiver 1. He's one of the top 5 this week, and then you got Terrence Williams coming in at wide receiver 3. Jason Witten is a low TE 1. And what I'm calling this, Keith, is a 10-gallon win for the Cowboys. Go Cowboys!
The Tennessee Titans travel to the Baltimore Ravens, the 2-6 Titans against the 5-4 Ravens. Again, 5-4. The Ravens are better than that record. You know they are. Last week they traveled to Pittsburgh and they just get passed all over by Ben Roethlisberger, who suddenly all he does is throw touchdown passes all of a sudden. The Titans, there's nothing to them. There just isn't. Zach Mettenberger should be starting again. It looks like this is going to be his team, even if Jake Locker was healthy. It doesn't even matter. Bishop Sankey, for whatever reason, whether it's him, whether it's the offensive line, whether it's the coaching, whatever you say, Bishop Sankey has to be viewed as a fantasy bust at this stage of the season. Nate Washington is their leading, or was their leading receiver last game with 4 catches for 68 yards. Yes, that Nate Washington. I bet y'all thought that he wasn't even in the league anymore. Going to Baltimore, they got to have a salty taste in their mouth after losing by 20 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will pick the Ravens and not have any qualms about it.
Yeah, I got the Ravens in this one, Keith. In fact, I think the Ravens should spank the Titans at home. It's about time that they've got this kind of a favorable matchup. They've had some pretty tough games leading up to this week, and I think it's just time for them to just sort of take one, make everybody feel good, and then move on to next week, week 11. In essence, what we've got is two teams here that, you sort of look at them, and the bottom line is the Titans just have no offense. 17.1 points per game on an average, and I'm not digging Zach Mettenberger at all as the starter. He's had his struggles, and the fantasy points or yards and TD that he scored last week was really done in terms of 2 weeks ago was due to garbage time. So I just can't see that being much good this week against a Ravens team that should be healthy and should be ready to just rip them apart at home in front of their hometown fans. For the Titans, I like Delaney Walker's a low tight end 1. You might be able to look at Kendall Wright as a wide receiver 3, given the talent, and Mettenberger's got to throw the ball to somebody. But outside of that, this is all Ravens. Joe Flacco's a low QB1. Justin Forsett makes for a great start against a team giving up 134.8 yards per game, 30 miscellaneous yards, and 1 TD per game. Steve Smith, Torrey Smith, they work in as wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 against the defense giving up 240 yards per game. And I like Owen Daniels as a low-end TE1. It's time for a Titans beatdown. Ravens win.
All right, the Kansas City Chiefs travel to the Buffalo Bills. The Bills had a bye last week, but their previous game, Kyle Orton, 4 touchdown passes on only 17 attempts. But let's just remember they were beating the Jets, who turned the ball over quite handily. It may mark the end of the Geno Smith era in New York. The Chiefs, on the other hand, also played the Jets their last game. It's a unique little twist here. But this was the Michael Vick-led Jets, and we all know how that usually ends if you're not playing Madden with Michael Vick. This is an interesting game because the Chiefs are 7th in points scored. The Bills are 2nd in points allowed on defense. So this is going to be the immovable force, or however that saying goes. I can't even think of it right now. But a good defense against a decent offense, even though they have struggled. The Chiefs' offense, that is, overall. The Bills have injuries at running back. Still, C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson are out. Anthony Dixon was their leading rusher against the Jets on October 26th, 22 rushes for 44 yards, not blowing the roof off. I don't see Kansas City's defense giving up many big plays to a quarterback like Kyle Orton, and I'm going to take the Chiefs on the road in this game.
Yeah, this is when I'm going to go with the hometown Buffalo Bills. What strikes you immediately about this game is it's going to be a low-scoring game, a defensive battle. Both teams sporting great defenses. Chiefs number 2 in scoring, Bills number 6 in scoring. But the thing that I can't escape the fact that the Bills are going to be playing at home in front of the hometown fans. And I think the Chiefs are just not as good as a team on the road. And they shouldn't be a good team against this Bills defense, which is stout against the run and stout against the pass. Jamal Charles is probably the best start all the way across the board, only because of the amount of touches that he's going to get. I still don't see him necessarily having the sort of breakthrough game you come to expect from him on a weekly basis. But look at him for about 100 yards and anywhere from 1 to 2 TDs. Travis Kelce makes for a good play at 65 yards and 1 TD. And if Sammy Watkins is healthy, you just have to get him played. I would avoid these quarterbacks in all aspects of fantasy football. Alex Smith, Kyle Orton, this is a good week to just sit them down. I like the Chiefs and the Bills defenses. They're both just outside of the top 5. Special teams will be the difference in this game. I think whichever team scores a special team touchdown will absolutely win. For me, I got the Chiefs getting buffaloed by the Bills. Bills win.
You were waiting an awful long time to use that one, weren't you?
You like that, huh?
Of note, as of right now, the forecast in Buffalo is calling for snow.
That's great.
Only 39 degrees, but only 39 degrees. We momentarily lost Jim. That's why I'm stuttering here. Only 39 degrees, but they are calling for snow in Buffalo. So as we try to get Jim back, let's Are you back, Mr. Saranteas?
Oh, I'm back. It was just one of these tiny little gremlins.
There you go. The gremlin being your hand clicking on hang up.